Hi, this is George Alger, and welcome to another segment of Our Ventura TV. Today's topic is social mobility in the United States, and our guest expert is Jamshid Damooei, who is the professor and chair of the Department of Finance and Economics at Cal Lutheran University. Welcome, Jamshid.
Thank you, George.
So let's start right in with this topic. How would you define social mobility?
Well, there's an easy way to define social mobility and maybe a little more complicated. The easy way to define social mobility is that, well, this is a chance of our children to move up the ladder of the income and wealth from where they grow up. To be a little more precise, if we take the whole entire United States and divide them into 5 categories of income, let's say that the lowest 20% right up to the highest 20%. When we talk about social mobility, what is the chance of a person who's born in the lowest 20% move up to the top? Of course, we can also look at movement from second to the third or the fourth, or from middle to the top. But basically, that's the gist of the definition.
Good. Now, is social mobility and economic mobility the same thing?
Pretty much the same.
Okay.
Pretty much the same. There are definitions, for example. Sometimes we talk about intergenerational social mobility. What it really means is what was discussing earlier on. So if you're born at an income group, what's the chance of you moving up? Sometimes we look at it in a different ways. For example, we look at what is called wage persistence, which means that how likely are wages to move up? And we kind of compare that for different income groups. But generally speaking, when we talk about social mobility, our focus is really on economic well-being of individuals and family and the opportunity that they have in their lifetime to move up the ladder of the income and wealth.
Good. So what does your research show in regards to what's happening in the United States in terms of social mobility?
I'm glad you asked me that question. Unfortunately, what I see is troubling in many ways. And maybe more explicit about it. Why is troubling? And then maybe you get a chance to talk about why these may have occurred. I started looking into issue of social mobility through my studies when I saw that there are a lot of wage stagnation in certain income groups. There seem to be that a lot of people work hard. Let us not forget, the concept of American dream is the ability to move up. If you're willing to work hard, so you can do it, which means that there is equal opportunity or great opportunity for people to move up the ladder of the income. My studies, when I was looking at the wage, in different parts of the country over time, I really saw a lot of stagnation. It really made me to look deeper. The question of American dream was really in the forefront of my thinking, because this is how America is known: land of opportunity, place where you can work hard and really achieve. There is no limit. We have got movies made on that. We've got a lot of things. And to a great extent, this is true, or has been true. So when I started looking at social mobility in the United States, I started looking at international comparisons. Some of the studies that have been done recently helped me a lot. There was a study in 2009, 2010 by OECD Research Group. That's really a group of countries which are really on the top of the income category: United States, Canada, Australia, a number of Western European countries. So I look at the study they did. The study is very recent. And I was very surprised to find out that among, let's say, 12, 13 countries, I think they altogether about 14 countries that they focused on, they could find information to make that kind of comparison based on the recent data. There, United States was really, in terms of social mobility, on a much lower scale than, let's say, countries, in Europe. Take, for example, United States. It was only 2 countries in that category were worse than United States: Italy and Great Britain. A lot of other European countries, our own neighboring country, Canada, was a lot better, in terms of ability of people to move up the ladder of the income and wealth.
And this is across the whole spectrum of levels, or one of the things I've heard is that the guys at the top are actually getting wealthier, and I guess perhaps the opposite is true too, that the guys at the bottom are either not moving up at all or they're actually going down.
It's very true. It's very true. Because if you look at, for example, the OECD studies, the idea was to find what is the percentage of relationship between the income of the children and their parents, sons and fathers. And here are some of the numbers. When you look at a country like Denmark, the percentage is about 15%. which means that parents' income can influence children's income only by 15%. US is 47%. Great Britain is 50%. Italy is 50%. Canada, I think, is about 11, 12. So, I'm sorry, 19, around that. But if you look at that, so you start asking this question, is there really more chance, is American dream is more realistic in a country like Denmark or United States? I mean, these are legitimate questions to ask and ponder and look into it.
But I want to make sure I understand the statistics you're presenting. So if you put a number out like 19% or 50%, whatever number we're talking about for a particular country, are you saying that that is only 19% of the people, for instance, could be influenced by their parents?
No, no. If you look at, let's go back again to the concept. If you have children, who grow up, let's say, in the bottom 20%, and what's the chance of them moving up? That can tell you. In this particular study, the relationship was that what is the influence of the parent's income in somebody's income when the guy grows up? Now, if you have 47%, means that your possibility to move up is very much tied to your parents' income. If it is 15%, it means the possibility for you to move up, or that child to move up, is only 15%. These numbers can be sometimes a little confusing, but I'm glad you asked that question, because that's really, then it shows that moving up is much easier in Denmark than is in the United States, than is in Italy, or in Great Britain. So these are the kind of numbers. The calculations are sometimes different, but the message is the same, and the kind of preponderance of evidence is very, very clear in these type of studies.
Okay, but I still want to make sure I'm getting my wits around this. So if in Denmark it's 15%, it's actually the 15% of the people that are moving upward economically or through social mobility, only 15% of them are influenced by their parents, which means 85% are moving up. Is that, do I have that correct?
That's a good way of interpret that, yeah.
Okay, so therefore...
I mean, it's not exactly that, but you could interpret it that way, which means it's much easier to move up, which means that your parents' income is not an important determinant of your well-being and well-doing.
So the 47% number in the United States, even though it's a higher number, it actually shows that there's a lower probability, a lower social mobility.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Which means that your parents have a much more determining impact for you to move up.
Okay. So to a certain extent, the percentage is almost inverse of your percentage.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I'm glad that you made that very clear for audience too.
So then do you know which country has the smallest percentage, which means the greatest opportunity for
Denmark.
So that is it.
That is
okay.
it.
All right. So that's the world.
That's been something that's really been discussed for the last 3-4 years, in many circles. And then again, the question is that, I mean, this is just an observation study. Then the question is why that happens.
Right. Yeah. And actually, I'd love to get an answer to that. But let me ask you this too. Do we know if this trend in the United States? Do we know what it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, or whatever time?
Good question. Not to my knowledge. You see, because
okay.
most of the time these type of studies are like this, that you have to look at the children's income, okay, let's say 30 years ago, 40 years ago, and then be able to have matching data 30, 40 years by generation past. So this is really large numbers, huge, gigantic studies which have that kind of database to be able to draw conclusion from. But again, as I said, that most of these studies, when you really look at how the study is structured, it looks at what's been going on in the last 30 years, 40 years, 50 years.
Okay, good.
But it's a very good question, that how are we doing now compared to looking 30 years, 40 years from now? That is yet to be seen, and that's the opportunity we have, because we can make changes, we can make improvements, and maybe we get the chance to talk about that.
Well, we also want to talk about why you might, why do you think that the United States is where it is in terms of positioning in the world, I should say, in the world community in terms of social mobility?
Great. Now, there's another study came out in 2012 by Pew Charitable Foundation. What they looked at the United States, just the United States, entire, economy of the United States, and they found some other numbers. Those numbers are quite interesting. And it shows that those who are in the bottom 20%, there's only 4% chance for them to get on the top. Those who are in the top, 40% of them or more stay on the top. Only 8% were likely to fall down. Those who are in the bottom 20%, 70% of them, that's very important, end up being below the average. So these are really very, very important numbers. So what they have pointed out in these studies? A number of things. The most important determinant is education. And interesting, because I'm also a professor, but I'm not really trying to promote. I think everybody knows how important education is. But then again, when you look at the education, you have to kind of go a little deeper. Spending is not, again, in some of these studies, spending is not the only factor that can make education better. The social structure, the quality of the education, what goes on in these schools, happen to be important determinant. For example, you have a school system that low income, middle income, high income family children go there. There's interaction between them socially, as opposed to another group, another society which is much more segregated, much more protected. The one that has this kind of fluency, the kind of mixture of the kids from different income groups tend to do better. Quality of the education. You spend money, and sometimes some teachers don't want to teach in certain areas. You even pay them premium salary or some sort of bonus. It doesn't necessarily mean that the best education would be provided for the kids. So we have to really fine-tune these. We have to look at the quality of education. The important thing in most of this is the social structure, what goes on in the community. And for that, there's another study that came up. Only in July of 2013, by two professors from Harvard and two from Berkeley. In fact, the guys who really worked in Harvard before worked in Berkeley. Their study is absolutely amazing. They looked at the social mobility across the United States in different regions. They have 740 plus areas that they really located and across the states. And they didn't want to do this study, but they had tax studies, and then they had this huge, gigantic database that allowed them to look at the income of the children 1980 right up 2010, 2011. What they found is absolutely amazing. They found that the social mobility, going back again to the definition, the ability of the children to go from the bottom 20% to the top 20% was very different. In a place like Salt Lake City in Utah, is about 11.5%. In a place like Atlanta in Georgia, it's 4%. Look at, for example, Los Angeles is not bad. We are, in that area, we are about between 9.3, 9.4. San Francisco is a little bit better than us, 11.2. And then when you look at the cluster of the states that they're not doing that good are in the South. And then they kind of look at, still the study is young because this is just came out a few months ago. They're still working, they're still debating what really brought this about. But some of the early indications from this and from previous studies go back again to the education, go to the ability of the people to mix. Kids go, for example, in certain areas, your kids can go to any schools and they can mix and socialize with others, have the same sort of quality education there. In other areas, it's far more different. Even things as much as mobility, to move in the city, taking your kids from one place to another. Even things like mobility of the people to move out of the state, go somewhere else, in terms of opportunities. So it brought a lot of clarity to this, but yet to be discussed, because there are other factors that we have to look at. So the bottom line is that social mobility is a very important factor. It really shows that how our population, our children, ourselves are moving forward. And it's a question of opportunity.
Great. Well, Jamshid, I know we could talk about this for a lot longer, but we have run out of time.
Really?
I know. It goes
when you're
by
enjoying
so
yourself,
fast.
time goes so fast.
Yes, indeed. So thank you very much for stopping by.
My pleasure.
This is George Alger signing off for another segment of Our Ventura TV. Until we meet again.